The value of the plastic that ends up in the environment today, in incineration, landfills, dump sites, in the ocean, is estimated at somewhere between $80 and $120 billion. This is about resource efficiency. It is to some extent also about better use of our resources. It's also to some extent about reduction. One of the reasons why I took the step out when I got the opportunity moving into the Alliance was recognizing the importance that the private sector is playing in advancing policy, but also being the hub where innovation and solution creation is actually happening. With the notion, seeing is believing. So if you see a clean environment, then you maybe have a very different appreciation of what it actually means to you. And if you see what a clean environment can offer in terms of ecosystem services as well.
Welcome to a special edition of the LYB podcast recorded at an event here at our Houston headquarters. In this episode, Tracey Campbell, EVP of Sustainability and Corporate Affairs for LYB, sits down with Jacob Duer, President and CEO of the Alliance to End Plastic Waste. It was a fireside chat attended by employees both in Houston and globally for LYB. The conversation really highlights the work that LYB and the AEPW do in making a more sustainable future. So, without further ado, let's get into the conversation.
So you may not know this, but we work in an industry which really transforms the world. And you're probably thinking, well, I should say that, right? The products that we make and sell every day here at this company, companies like ours, when you put those building blocks together, they are creating the materials for healthcare. They are creating the materials you see in your house, in your closet, in your mobile phone, and all other electronic devices. So we don't often talk about that, and we are, and so our communications team and the brain that we have as a company now, we're always talking about how we are the building blocks of the future, and we are solutions which create, right, solutions of everyday sustainable living. So that's really what's important. We also have the challenge of waste, and not just every waste that we're generating as growing populations and populations that strive for higher standards of living, but plastic waste has really become a defining environmental issue of our time, and one that's important to our company. So if you think about our company as a whole, years ago, before even we had our current 3-pillar strategy, we believed in addressing plastic waste. And now we're committed to plastic waste, but we're also committed to building a profitable and circular carbon business. And why is that? And what are the things that we could do with that, right? If you think about the importance of our license to operate our core petrochemical businesses that make all of those building blocks, and if you think about if we're not able to also address plastic waste and bring those solutions to life, that could impact our ability to grow and prosper and thrive in the future. So it's important to us from a business perspective. So what are we doing about it? If you think about how we are under construction, our first large-scale, commercial-scale facility in Germany, starting up the end of next year. Very excited about that. This is our chemical recycling facilities. We've branded and expanded a circular portfolio. We have integrated recycling ecosystems or hubs associated with our facilities. And if you think about, you're going to hear from Jacob in a minute about impact at scale. That's our version of impact at scale. Because if we build all the blocks together, bring the value chains together, we can build a much larger ecosystem, a system for mechanical, chemical sorting, etc., and really deliver a lot of value to the company. And perhaps most importantly, why we're here today, we've also funded and formed partnerships, especially the Alliance to End Plastic Waste. And what those partnerships are doing are embracing circularity, leaning into policy, and helping investing in waste management systems around the globe. So, with the Alliance to End Plastic Waste, we are one of the founding members back in 2019, I think it was. So our company and many companies like ours and many companies from other parts of the value chain, we support the Alliance, we fund the Alliance, and we guide and govern and help support the Alliance as they take our contributions and invest in waste management that is self-sustaining. And Jacob will talk about that. The self-sustaining is important. The Alliance isn't a charity that just goes and cleans up sites. That's probably a misperception. They're out there to fund a business model that they can help grow and invest and be that first loan to. that would be self-sustaining over time because it creates business and value in that community. Welcome, Jacob.
Thank you very much, Tracy. And before I introduce myself, let me start by thanking you and thanking LyondellBasell for not only being a founding member of the Alliance back in 2019, but for you in particular for serving as the chair of the Alliance. Tracy has been following the Alliance since the very early days, but at the beginning of this year, you took on the chair role. It's a great honor and pleasure to work with you and to deeply appreciate the guidance and as input that you provided. So we hope that that's a collaboration also in your chair role that will extend beyond the end of the year because it's a 1-year term. So that's an invitation. But really, thank you for your leadership.
Me on the spot. Likewise, it's a pleasure.
Thank you. So I joined the Alliance back in late 2019, and I came from the United Nations. I worked with the United Nations Environment Program before. I was with them for 17 years and with the UN for 22 years. Spent most of my life in the space around sustainability, environment, and in the space focusing on regulation and policy, recognizing the importance of policy and driving the change that we want to see in different areas. The area where I worked on towards the end within the UN system was in chemicals and waste management. I had an opportunity to lead the negotiations on an internationally legally binding instrument on mercury that ended up being the Minamata Convention on mercury, so addressing mercury pollution, and really took the negotiations from the very early stages until the very end, until the so-called COP1, the Conference of the Parties, after more than 50 countries had ratified the convention. I'm coming really from a policy space. One of the reasons why I took the step out when I got the opportunity moving into the Alliance was recognizing the importance that the private sector is playing in advancing policy, but also being the hub where innovation and solution creation is actually happening. I haven't been in the policy space for many years. I see the need for it, but I also see the limitations. And the Alliance is really providing a unique opportunity of filling that gap between policy and where action is happening on the ground. The Alliance was then established back in 2019. I joined in October 2019, so almost 6 years ago. Moved to Singapore, where we have our headquarters, and with the objective of really building out and standing up the organization. But I didn't know at the time that I moved to Singapore, that was 3 weeks before COVID hit the world. Singapore shut down for 2 years, and we still had to stand up an organization. So a little bit of an uphill sort of challenge at the very early days of the Alliance. But looking now 5 years ahead, we have had an incredible journey thanks to our members, but also thanks to all the partners that we have been working with, government, civil society organizations, and more recently, also financial institutions.
Great. Thank you, Jacob. And perhaps a little bit more, Jacob, about, your own passion on addressing plastic waste and also how you've evolved to see the circular economy as a solution for that.
So having been in the sustainability and the environment space for many, many years, always cared about protecting the environment, making sure that we leave behind a clean environment for our future generations. And the plastic agenda sort of, I wouldn't say came out of the blue, but it came really, really fast back in 2017, 2018. Nobody had really spoken a lot about plastic or cared much about this particular topic. But there was a lot of activism, as you probably will recall, around that time. Greenpeace, WWF, many other organizations started to bring this to the forefront. And in record time, actually, it went from almost a non-issue to one of the most important environmental issues that governments and the private sector was faced with. And I saw really the need for wanting to showcase what are the type of change and the solutions that are required at the national level, recognizing again the limitation of what policy can do, and looking at how do we explore and how do we bring in the private sector as creating and potentially even leading some of that transformation and transition that's required at the national level. The Alliance is providing that opportunity, is providing that platform more than any other organization out there. If we're looking at some of the actions that are required when we look at pollution issues at the national level, Access to funding is absolutely fundamental. Access to knowledge and access to innovation and technology. And if we're looking at what is it that has happened in other areas like climate change, renewable energy, we've seen a pathway that is often 10, 50, 20, 25 years from when an idea, when a concept is emerging, when a problem is being identified, to solutions really starting to be rolled out. In the context of plastic, as I said, it only started really becoming an issue around 2018, 2019, and in record time, not only at the policy space as this moved forward really, really fast, maybe even too fast for the world actually to catch up with it and for governments to be able to align on how to address it, but also when we're looking at the private sector and the role that it's playing. When the Alliance was initially established back in 2019, the main focus was really on the leakage. How do we prevent plastic from leaking into the environment, in particular in developing countries, in emerging economies? And remember when I joined and we started the development late 2019 of the first strategy for the Alliance, we started to introduce the word circular. Everybody was asking, what does circular mean? This is about preventing leakage. This is not about thinking too much about recycling, circularity, retaining the material in the value chain and bringing it back into the system. But in a very short span of time, circularity became not only a buzzword, but it became actually the driver for a lot of the thinking that's happening, not only within companies, but also among governments and most certainly for the Alliance. To the extent that it's actually changed our mission. Our initial focus and mission was ending plastic waste from a leakage perspective. That mission has now transformed as we did a strategy review 18 months ago or so into creating a circular economy for plastic. The value of the plastic that ends up in the environment today, in incineration, landfills, dump sites, in the ocean, is estimated at somewhere between $80 and $120 billion. That's an incredible value loss. If we can capture just 10% or 20% or 30% or 40% of that plastic in a relatively short span of time, then we can bring back a lot of that value into the value chain and into a circular or a recycling economy. This is about resource efficiency. It is to some extent also about better use of our resources. It's also to some extent about reduction. So circularity is really the driver for the way that we are thinking about it, going well beyond looking at it from a purely development issue and an environmental issue, but looking at it from a socio-economic issue and thinking the only way really to drive change here is if we create an economic model associated with it. If there's no money in it, you're not going to create economically viable solutions that ultimately will attract the hundreds of millions of dollars that's required in order to put in place waste management, infrastructure solutions, recycling plans, whether it's mechanical or chemicals recycling, or the other types of gaps that needs to be closed when we're talking about circular economy.
Thank you. And I'm going to deviate just a little bit because you mentioned financing and you mentioned hundreds of millions. And I've heard that it could take trillions. And it doesn't matter whether it's 3 or 14. I've heard both numbers quoted.
But trillions of dollars are required to invest in waste management where it doesn't exist today. And we're talking about 3 billion people who lack access to basic waste management. Many of you have probably been there, seen those countries where you just can't find any trash collection. So one of the exciting things, or
Perhaps part of the strategy shift that you've done
recently, is how you catalyze investment from
not just the members, because our member dollars can only go so far, but we need
quadruple trillions more. So tell us a little bit about the catalyst that you also do as part of the Alliance strategy.
So the Alliance, we're rather fortunate in many ways that we have access to a significant amount of financial resources. We are the largest player when we are talking around ending plastic pollution and creating a circular economy. Through our membership, we have raised around $600 million. So significant in this particular space as a public charity, as a nonprofit. While we have access to a lot of resources, at the end of the day, as you said, it requires, I tend to say hundreds of millions because it seems more reachable, but you are probably right. It is trillions of dollars that's required here. But in order really to drive impact and drive impact at scale, one of our important learnings from the early days, it was an objective, what was a difficult one to achieve in the early days, was how do we unlock capital from other sources? How do we work with partners that sits on significantly more financial resources than we do? And we have managed to sort of break that difficult challenge in starting to work with development finance institutions that literally are sitting on, if not trillions, then at least billions of dollars ready for direct investment into infrastructure solutions in the countries where we are working. So how do we use our funding to unlock that capital, work with national governments, and then investing into infrastructure solutions on the ground? And we have done the first sort of milestone, I would say, event for us when we are talking about unlocking capital is what we've been doing with the Asian Infrastructure and Investment Bank, where we have recently signed a collaboration agreement of $180 million. The alliance is contributing $20 million. The bank is providing $150 million as a loan to the government of Indonesia, and the government itself is providing $10 million. This is what is sort of in the development world called blended financing. It's public and private financing coming together to solve for a development issue in an emerging economy. So suddenly we were moving away from the alliance, just doing our own work, which is important, but in the beginning has really not moved the needle. There's only so much you can do with $2 million or $3 million or $4 million project. Now with a significant investment of the alliance, with our partnership with the Asian Infrastructure and Investment Bank, and also with the government, we are suddenly having not a $20 million project that the alliance will be funding, but a $180 million project on the ground. And that also means, that's the challenge that I've been faced with, how do you drive impact at scale, let alone at speed? How do you move from doing good in a small community, solving a problem with 10,000, 20,000, 30,000 people, to doing it for millions and millions of people? So you really start moving the needle in a visible way to prevent the leakage of plastic waste into the environment, but also bringing that plastic back into the industry that is investing into recycling as feedstock. And that scale is now starting to happen, in particular through our engagement with the development finance institutions. So we've gone through a strategy review, and one of the core pillars within that strategy is not around the technical solutions, it is actually around the engagement with the development finance institutions. We have the same not only with LYB, we're also working with the Green Climate Fund, we are working with the Development Bank of South Africa, which is the priority country for the alliance. We are working with the IFC, we are working with the Asian Development Bank as well. And based on the $600 million that we have sort of benefited from our member companies, we have today unlocked another $600 million from our engagement with the development finance institutions. We're still in the early stages. We sort of reached, in a way, for better or worse, a little bit our own capacity as to how much can we take on. When we started off in the beginning, we were out there knocking on doors, literally trying to identify project partners, trying to understand where is it that we add value, what is it that differentiates us from the other actors in this space. We're now in that fortunate position where governments and countries are coming to us to knock on the door. Development finance institutions are coming to us. Can we work here? Can we work here? But we are starting to have some limitations, both in terms of our human resources and capacity, but also in our financial resources to be able to intervene in too many places. And maybe link to that just quickly on our strategy review. Part of the strategy transition that we have made is to focus on a limited number, but clearly identified geographies and countries. Until now, we've been operating in around 25, 30 countries, been running 80 projects of different sizes. We are now narrowing that down to only operating in 5 countries, concentrating all our financial resources and all our own human resources and capacities into those 5 countries.
Thank you. And I can echo exactly what you're saying, because I witnessed these development finance institutions who basically are coming to the table saying, I have lots of money, but I don't know what to do with it. I don't have the solution. And the alliance could fill that gap in terms of, we have a solution. We have
contributions and know-how to work with these local governments. So I've seen those conversations happening. So you just mentioned I'll switch a little bit, the 5 countries that we're now focused on, again, sort of focusing on our efforts to deliver larger, more repeatable impact over the years. Maybe give us an example of what has happened in either Indonesia, which is one of our focus countries. We're also focused on South Africa, which is an area that I'm a champion of because, I'm an expert in South Africa. But we all have a role to play. And really what that means is I'm responsible for doing extra due diligence and extra care on the program. And you might give more guidance on South Africa. And another one of my peers on the board will do the same for the other countries that we're looking at. So we're focused on Indonesia, South Africa, India, and then also recently Brazil and GCC. So I'll call it the Greater Middle East. And you might be thinking, Middle East, don't they have a lot of money? Yes. And what they're asking from us is actually not for money, but for know-how. So again, we can put our talents where we need to. So maybe give us an example of the type of work we've done in Indonesia.
Yeah. So Indonesia is the country where we had our first investment that was in mid-2019 in Bali, northwestern side of Bali. There was a small community called Jembrana. We worked with Project Stop, an organization there putting in place basically waste infrastructure. A community, 40,000 people. And when I say basic waste management infrastructure, then it is really basic. It's putting in place bins in a household, a green bin and a yellow bin, providing education around how to sort the household waste. There's a lot of behavior change associated with it. It's providing trikes for the pickup of the waste. One trike picks up the dry waste and another trike picks up the wet waste, bringing it to a sorting center where we're putting up a sorting line. It's manual sorting, so all the waste that's being brought there is further sorted, and everything that is being sorted out of value is then being put out on the market. Plastic, paper, aluminium, glass, anything you can think of, and is then being traded there. Sounds very basic, but you have to recognize that in these communities, there's nothing today. There is no place to go with your waste. There is only one place, and that is the nearby beach. Water catchment that sits somewhere else, or you burn it, or you go just a little bit further, as far away as you can, and then you just leave it on the outside out there. So that's how we got started in Indonesia. Indonesia is the second largest polluter of plastic waste into the environment. We then moved and wanted to build on our learnings in Indonesia and moved from a community of 40,000 to a regency covering 1.5 million people. So how do we take the learnings from 40,000, which was a challenge, that was during COVID as well, to a much larger community putting in place these type of systems? In principle, a similar system, but of course at a very, very different scale. Even though it's a lot larger, it's still not at the scale where we have the potential to operate as an organization. One of the very important learnings is you can have the best system in place, but if you don't have the population, the households and the citizens with you, it's not going to be utilized. So behavior change has become an absolutely fundamental part of what we are doing. Getting people not only to buy in, but to literally also pay for this service, and through payment of the service, paying a household fee, also creating a strong sense of ownership. I had a chance to go to Indonesia a few weeks ago together with the person who is leading our work there. And we met some of those partners that we are working with that is doing behavior change, right? And I think it's not about sending out a letter. It's not about, you go into the community square and people are talking about it. It's really moving from household to household, knocking on every single door, having conversations around the importance of waste management, the importance of separating at the level of household, why it pays off and why that $1 that it costs for this service or 80 cents is a good investment and it's a good use of their resources. What it means for their environment if there's no waste out there, if they don't have to burn it or bring it down to the closest beach. What it means in terms of creating job opportunities to have waste management systems in place, because you actually employ a lot of people in this regard. We also did something very visible around the behavior change. There's a lot of these open dump sites that are in a very polluted environment, hotspots we call them. So we started to clean up that, and LyondellBasell was instrumental in funding some of that work beyond your contribution to the alliance in terms of your membership fee. Because a little bit the notion, seeing is believing. So if you see a clean environment, then you maybe have a very different appreciation of what it actually means to you. And if you see what a clean environment can offer in terms of ecosystem services as well. So what we saw when the environment suddenly was clean, and we cleaned up more than 300 hotspots in the Malang Regency, people suddenly started to realize that this can be used for setting up a small stand where you can sell products from. The kids can play there, or you can grow trees, or whatever it was. So an appreciation that a clean environment is something that is actually benefiting society. So behavior change is fundamental, but it's extremely time consuming and challenging. Right? And ultimately, you have to get people to pay for it. So a strong sense of ownership. So we went from 40,000 to 1 or 1.5 million. What we are doing now with the Asian Infrastructure and Investment Bank is now up to 9 million people. So 40,000 to 1.5 to 9 million. And that's what I mean about growing. The solution is more or less the same what we are looking for, but a very different amount of resources is being pumped in. Now we can talk about scale. Now we can start talking about, and this is fully implemented, moving the needle. Maybe a little bit too early to talk about, but the World Bank, which is another big financial institution, obviously, has recently reached out to us as they wanted to start conversations with us because of our technical knowledge and because of our implementation experience working with partners on the ground. They have access to hundreds of millions that they want to invest into Indonesia. They are not looking for our capital, which is nice, but they're looking for our experience and expertise. And suddenly they want to move from 9 million to a number that's significantly higher than that. So that's the model and the path that we want to take, and are starting to show it is possible. Indonesia is one country where we are very active and where we have provided the largest amount of financial resources. We have people on the ground there as well. We have 6 people from the Alliance working there. India is another priority country, South Africa, Brazil, and then the Middle East. South Africa is very different. While the challenge around waste sitting in the environment is the same, the lack of infrastructure, we have a very strong informal waste pickers base in South Africa. So the majority of the work that we've been doing in South Africa right now has been working with associations that are working directly with the informal waste pickers that are collecting waste from households, collecting waste that sits in the environment, bringing it back into the system, getting it sorted, and then sold off to traders. So different ways of looking at waste management. In Brazil, it would be very similar. It's not about waste infrastructure solutions, about putting bins into the household. It's working with the informal waste pickers. More than 1 million people are part of that value chain as informal waste pickers in Brazil. It's really exciting to see the growth. So it's not about these small projects. It is really around systems change on the ground. How do we move from just fixing a beach here or a small community here? How do we put in place the system that's required, starting with behavior change, or even further up in terms of design for circularity, behavior change, household sorting, sorting and further collection, further sorting, and then recycling. And if we can get the system to working with the right partners, then we can create not only solutions, but lasting solutions that over time will be economically viable.
To build on that system, and you mentioned it a few times, but you talked about the waste pickers, you talked about building on a system that is economically viable for a long time.
We as a company, we're always focused on metrics, right? Are we safe? What is our operating rate? How much material are we producing? Some metrics are key to an industry like ours. Metrics are very key to the Alliance and their ability to deliver impact. And if you look at their recent impact report, the key metrics that we measure in the Alliance are how much waste is being prevented from entering into the environment. And perhaps as important is how is that waste being valorized? And valorized just means how are we making money? What's the business model of that waste? Because if you clean it up and you're not able to create a business model with the waste, then it's probably just going to recreate itself down way or in a different hotspot that you talked about. So talk a little bit about the valorization and how that's important for all of the projects that we're doing around the world.
So metrics is an important, but how do we measure success, right? We are often being challenged by that by So by you, internally, that's for sure, but also externally, right? You have access to all the resources. What are you doing with it, right? How do you make a meaningful difference out there? And I think, in the early days in particular, we were looking very much about how much waste are we preventing from leaking into the environment, looking at it from a valorization. And for us, valorization is what goes into recycling afterwards. We've seen a constant growth, obviously, as we have engaged in many more countries and engaged in larger projects. And last year, we saw a doubling of our output compared to what we've seen since the beginning of the time that the alliance was established. So really a move in the right direction. While it is a move in the right direction and what we believe is a very large number, the challenge is that it's still, in a way, if I may say,
a drop in
the ocean or in the bucket, right? Because while our numbers are big, if we're looking at the amount of plastic waste that's ending up in the environment, even if we do 2 or 3 or 4 or 500,000 tons, that amount is out there is around 12 million. If we are compared to that amount, often what we are compared to is the amount of polymers produced. Obviously, our impact is limited. So well beyond the KT numbers and the valorization number, we're also looking at how do we develop these scalable and replicable solutions, right, through the systems change. Our numbers will never be big enough, but if we can showcase how it can be done, how the resources will flow to those solutions, and work with governments and the right partners in replicating already scaled solutions, then the numbers are going to go literally through the roof eventually. Right? So we have different types of metrics. We have our external metrics that we're reporting on. And then beyond that, obviously, we have some internal metrics under our country program to have very detailed metrics to measure the progress, the constant progress of our work. Also recognize in particular when we are looking at infrastructure solutions, they take time. They don't happen overnight. They take years working first with the development finance institutions, with governments, starting to put them into place. But how do we ensure that they continue to progress at speed so that the end result is within reach and within the timeline that has been set? So I think we are very encouraged with the progress that we have made and with the numbers that we are generating. But we also believe that we can do more. And I think that's what you, Tracey, and the board more broadly is putting on us as a challenge: deliver impact at scale. And I think this is what everyone is struggling with. How do you do that scale? I think we are getting closer to cracking that nut. And one of them is the access to financing. In many ways, we're a nonprofit. We are 501c3 in the US. We're registered into Singapore as well, where we have a nonprofit status. But we really operate like a company and we think like a company. So we have systems, processes in place that are similar to what you will see in most of our member companies, in particular in the resin producing and petrochemical industry. We have an audit committee. We have a audit and risk committee. We have people who are dedicated purely to risk and compliance related issues. We have human rights policies. We have safety, health and safety related policies. We have everything in place that you would find in most companies. I think in most 501c3s, you would not see that. We put a lot of effort and resources into that. Our exposure is the same exposure that we put our member companies under. Therefore, we have to be as tight as we can in everything that we're doing. Something goes wrong in one of our projects, and we do operate in high-risk environments. We do operate often with partners that may not have the type of scrutiny in place that we would like them to have. We're therefore doing a lot of training and education with them to ensure that the partners that we select minimize to the extent possible the risk that they are exposed to at the project level. That also means that the workers, the informal waste pickers, the ones who are at the sorting stations, et cetera, are provided all the safety equipment that you would see in a normal facility in most countries. So quite different from many. I think this is at the core of who we are. It's at the core of who our members are, and something that we really allocate a lot of resources and capacity to within the Alliance.
What is the biggest opportunity in front of us for the Alliance right now that kind of you see that could really accelerate progress in this space?
I talked now about the Development Finance Institution. I'm sure most of you have followed the treaty negotiations on plastic pollution, and unfortunately they didn't land where we had hoped that they would land in August when governments met in Geneva. And while that's unfortunate and why governments will continue to negotiate, I think we want to look at that as an opportunity. What does that mean for us? Recognizing that a treaty will come. The question is when? Is it in 1 year or in 2 years and 3 years? And I think that's unknown at this point in time. I think we have an opportunity to show why action matters, not just to solve a problem, but also to inform policy making. We're almost looking at it within the alliance, sort of a tagline from activism and advocacy to action. So activism and advocacy has in a way brought us to where we are, brought the topic to the forefront. Advocacy has been trying to work with governments, putting forward opinions and trying ultimately to get through advocacy governments to reach consensus on how to address the issue of plastic pollution. But they have not succeeded, those organizations that are working on that. So we believe that the alliance, with our focus on action, we call ourselves a do tank, and really actually be, in a way, in a new way, the organization, the type of organization that can inform policy making. So really showing that the right type of action on the ground, and we believe that the focus needs to be on waste management, circularity, and recycling more broadly. If we can show that it works, if we can show it's economically viable, and if we can show that it can be done at scale, that will give governments a very different view of what is required in a future treaty. The reason why it has sort of been faced with challenges is some of the upstream measures. As you know, a number of countries are advocating for production caps on polymers. Other countries are not in favor of that. And as long as those positions are being held, there won't be any treaty coming out. I think that's quite clear. The unfortunate part of it is without a treaty, governments who are in most need, in particular when we're looking at waste management, they're not getting access to capacity building, technical assistance, and financial resources. So no treaty is solving nothing. It's not solving for the problem. The problem continues to grow. And we believe that we as an organization, and that's what I think we see as the biggest opportunity. Although we had hoped for and want to see a treaty, it's not there. How do we continue to go forward? The governments who are focused on change and action with or without a treaty.
I agree. I think a treaty would accelerate progress for all countries around the world, especially those who need waste management and need financing the most. But in the absence, or while we continue to negotiate, hopefully not forever, hopefully we'll make progress. In the absence, we'll keep doing what we're doing, right? Our industry will continue to lean in. The alliance is leaning in. We're seeing more and more traction from those financial institutions. So we'll just keep going and pressing ahead, but it sure would be nice to have an accelerant on the list. So thank you so much for being here. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Thank you to Tracey Campbell and Jacob Duer for the insights, and to all of our colleagues who joined the LYB Fireside Chat Live. If you'd like to learn more, you can visit lyb.com or the AEPW site at endplasticwaste.org. And don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss a future episode of the LYB podcast. Thanks so much for listening.